Welcome to CS Week Marketplace, third Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern webinar series. CS Week Marketplace offers fresh perspectives and strategies presented monthly by knowledgeable specialists from the Conference 37 Platinum and Gold sponsors. I am John Sild, and I'm with CS Week, and I'll be your moderator today. CS Week and Conference 38 will be held from May 5th through the 9th at the Henry B. Gonzalez Convention Center, San Antonio, Texas. Early registration is now open. This program will be recorded and available for playback, as are our other archive presentations found under the Educational Venues Third Tuesday link on our website. Today's program is The Importance of Thinking About OCM Early On, presented by 5 Points. Attendees are encouraged to upload questions in the Q&A panel as they arise. However, all questions will be held until the presentation for the Q&A segment. Please address your questions to all and not just the speaker. We are pleased to welcome Sheila Gatlin, Vice President of Organizational Change Management and Training with 5 Points, and Chad Hamilton, Vice President, Managed Services, 5 Points. A little bio on each one. Sheila Gatlin is Vice President of Organizational Change Management and Training with over 15 years of professional experience working with utility clients in training, business analysis, organizational change management, and project management. Sheila has been responsible for overseeing organizational change and training incentives for CIS, MDM, MWM, and AMI deployments. Prior to joining 5 Point Partners, Sheila held various posts leading projects and operational teams with software companies and service firms. Sheila has a BS in Political Science and Criminal Justice from Minnesota State University, Moorhead, and an MS in Technical and Professional Communications from Southern Polytech State University. Chad Hamilton, Vice President, Managed Services, 5 Point. Chad had joined the team at 5 Points in January of 2009 and has served in a variety of projects and client management roles. Currently, he is a client executive responsible for account relationships with several managed service accounts, as well as providing project oversight for other clients, CIS and AMI incentives. Prior to joining 5 Points, Chad worked at Accenture and Capstone Consulting Partners as a systems consultant on engagement primarily in the utilities and telecommunications industry. Within utilities, Chad has experience in distribution operations, including customer service, billing, metering, fieldwork operations, finance, and asset management. Chad has served in a variety of roles over the years in implementation and managed service engagements. We are pleased to welcome both Sheila and Chad, and I'm going to pass the ball to Sheila.
Oh, actually, we're going to pass the ball to Chad. But here, thank you, everybody, for joining us for this session today. We certainly do a lot of work with clients around organizational change management and as part of our implementations and as part of our advisory services and consulting work. Chad is going to open the session, so I'll turn it over to Chad.
Hi, everyone. Yes, today we wanted to talk a little bit about organizational change management and more specifically about making sure that you make OCM a part of your project implementations early on and make them a meaningful part of your implementations. With all the work that's going on within the utility industry in terms of technology and implementing new applications, a lot of focus is often placed on the technologies themselves, but not necessarily as much on the people. And we feel it's never too early on a project and then also never too late to start putting together an OCM framework for your project and for your organization. So today, in jumping to the agenda, we'll give you some introductions, although I think John did a very fine job introducing us, probably better than we could have done ourselves. But give you a brief introduction on ourselves. Talk a little bit about 5 Point, just a very brief summary of 5 Point as a company, and then talk about some of the common project challenges specifically related to OCM, go through some of the frameworks and methodologies, talk about the metrics that are associated with OCM and some of the trends within the marketplace, and then finally wrap up with any questions that you guys may have. I think three main things that we'd like you guys to get out of today's session is really to gain an appreciation for the importance of starting meaningful OCM activities early on in the project as an integrated project work stream within the project, not something that's done as a afterthought or as time permits. What we believe is that there are key components to the OCM framework, and we'll share those components with you. And finally, we want you guys to understand how the primary OCM deliverables as we see them add value to the solution implementation, as well as to your organization post-go live in terms of the value the solutions would provide for you guys to your particular utility. So as far as introductions go, again, John, I think did a great job. I've been in the consulting industry for about 20 years, and the vast majority of that spent in utilities. But you guys are probably asking yourself, why is the managed services guy doing the presentation on OCM implementation work? Well, I have done a few implementations and in various different utility-specific products, and so have certainly experienced some of that as part of those implementations. But really more germane to me right now is the fact that I actually have to support, as a managed services provider, a lot of the implementations that are being done by various companies, including ours, within the market. And have seen firsthand what not doing a good job at OCM can do to an organization. So I felt like this was a good topic to bring forth to the group today. Sheila?
Yep. Hi, Sheila Gatlin here. As John gave a very detailed bio and background on me, really I've been focused on the utility industry, and I've always been on, I would say, the people side of technology change, helping companies through system implementations, business process improvement type projects, focused a lot on implementing training programs, blended learning programs, as well as organizational change management programs. So learned a lot, have seen a lot, certainly from many of you, even on the line today, as well as a number of other clients.
So moving on, in terms of the 5-point profile, some of you may be familiar with us as a company, but for those that are not, we're a little over 5 years old, started in November of 2008, headquartered in Atlanta, with some offices offshore as well. We have about 275 employees, and we really serve, and we offer our service through 3 service lines, if you will. One is advisory, where we do application and planning and technology roadmaps for companies, as well as assist with solution procurements and selecting the right solution for your company. We also do implementation services, primarily within what I would call utility-specific applications. So CIS systems, EAM systems, and AMI, MDM, and mobility systems as well. And then finally, managed services, where we operate support for various companies in a couple different areas. We do infrastructure support, which is really the technology stacks associated with applications, as well as some of the hardware and database work. We run operations where we actually execute batch operations and manage integration for various companies. And then we also do what we call solution development work, where we do break-fix work and enhancement work for various companies on various applications. We've assisted a lot of different companies over the years, over 200 customers, and feel like we're a utility-specific company and bring that expertise to bear on the market. So, one of the themes that we see is that, in general, is that business and technology change is constant. There's always something going on within your company in terms of implementations. In an evolving technology landscape study we did in August of 2013, 5-point surveyed a number of different utilities and found that really the majority see an increase in 2014 in the amount of work and investments that are going to be done in technology. So as those technology investments are implemented, there's obviously that people side to it that needs to be addressed as they move forward to make sure that they maximize that investment. Now, in terms of the implementations themselves, there's definitely a lot of challenges, and on this slide we focus on some of the ones related to the organization itself. The business processes that the implementation team may be working with may not be consistent. There may not be a common understanding across the organization of what the business process is. And gaining that consistency across the various stakeholders of the organization can be challenging. The business processes aren't necessarily even maintained, either whether they were maintained as existing processes, or as you go into the implementation, do you maintain those business processes as it changes, as things change for the solution that's being implemented. Often, while the business processes may be changing, the ability for the customer and your end users to adapt to those changes is sometimes problematic as well. And they may not necessarily be ready for those changes at the time the project's going live. Also, what we find to be very common is training focuses on how the system works, discrete functions of the system, rather than putting into the context of how the end user is doing their job. And while that may seem like a fine point, we see that as a key downfall of some of the implementations that are going on in the marketplace. Another key point is that users often are trained and start using the system, but there's a limited amount of support for them after that. And we feel like that's a key component to the OCM activities that occur during the project to ensure that the end users are supported post-go live.
So we like to use those challenges, those common challenges, as a way to set a context for why do OCM. So we're going to talk a little bit about why basically OCM is needed, why we have to address individual people through their transition from a current state to a desired future state. So this slide here actually shows a couple of diagrams. You may or may not have seen these before, but they address the human side of change. Anytime change is being initiated, whether it's technology change or business process change, we are human and we have reactions to that change. On the right-hand side, you see a diagram that shows some of the both positive and negative reactions to change. People go through anger, denial, immobilization. Sometimes people are very happy about the change. Some people, sometimes people aren't very happy about the change. The ultimate goal, though, is acceptance, which is on the far right-hand side of that curve. So what we're trying to do with organizational change management efforts is help people along those emotional roller coasters, as that shows, and help them get to the point of acceptance. On the left-hand side of the diagram is some of the general or almost behavioral reactions to change. As change is initiated, people start out in this sort of uninformed optimism where they're thinking, okay, well, change, that might be good. We need a new system. These processes have been sort of slow for us. There are lots of manual steps, whatever the change is related to. And then people tend to get into an informed pessimism, where they start to see the reality of what that change is. And we see some behaviors here regarding people checking out. They either resist or they check out, and we'll talk a little bit more about resistance here in a minute. But from a checking out perspective, people can covertly check out or overtly check out. If you're doing a large system implementation, you may hear people say, I don't want to deal with this change, I'm just going to retire. Was actually with a client last week who one of the people who attended an OCM workshop said, I'm here, but I'm going to retire, before this thing goes live. And that's fine, understanding that they're in a different place. From an overt checking out perspective, some people will basically say, I understand that a change is coming, but I don't necessarily like it, and I'm just going to try to fly under the radar for a little while and pretend that the change isn't happening. But ultimately, if they're, they continue on, obviously, within the organization through the change process, again, we try to get them to acceptance. So resistance can happen at all levels. Resistance, and this is very normal, we see this across a lot of clients that we interact with. Executives resist at times because the change might be not connected or not aligned with their overall, their strategy, or aligned with their career path or their compensation plan. Mid-level management, mid-level managers and supervisors, they tend to resist because the change obviously has a pretty big impact on them. Sometimes they fear loss of power, control. They're the knowledge holders within their organization. They've been around for a while. They know what their groups do. They know how groups interact. And so changes to that, whether it's technology and business process, affect them.
Yeah, and I would say that from a mid-management perspective, that's really the key, because they typically tend to be the most resistant to change of the three groups, but they're also probably the most important to your implementation as well. So the ability to bring them along that change curve as quickly as possible is really key to the implementation.
Yeah, and so again, to our the objective of our session is about starting organizational change management initiatives early, engaging executives, engaging mid-level management. The reason we've found that mid-level management is the highest resistance group is because they are the ones who are looked upon. They have to make it real. They're getting the strategy from the executives, and their employees are looking at them for direction and guidance and messages. At the employee level, in terms of resistance, obviously employees resist because they have a fear of the unknown. They fear, that it's going to have a negative impact on their job, or they may just not be aware of what the change is. They might not have the appropriate awareness or understanding of what the change is. So, from a level set perspective, what is organizational change management? So we've set some context around some of the challenges and some of the resistance, but what is organizational change management? OCM is a structured approach to get people from where they are to where you want them to be. It's certainly aimed at preparing employees, engaging them, involving them, getting buy-in so that they're part of the change process. Peter Senge says people don't like being changed. People don't resist change. They resist being changed. Apologize for stumbling over that a minute. But so engaging them in the process, in the change process, is very important. On the right-hand side, it says OCM is not. It's not just communications. It's not just training. It's not just business process management. And sometimes I say, oh, I do organizational change, or I do change management, and people think I'm referring to IT change control or version control. So I always like to make a distinction that this really is around the people aspects of the change.
So in talking about the theory versus reality, it's funny because you'll never hear an elected official say, I'm against education. You're always for education. And I don't think you'll ever hear a utility executive say, I'm against organizational change management, or I don't see the value. In a survey that we did in November of 2013 around organizational change management, the people surveyed said, 75% said that the executives valued organizational change management. So I think that in the market and in the industry, certainly there's an awareness that people feel like this is important, which is great. I mean, that's certainly a great first step. But what you'll also see is that belief does not necessarily get backed up in terms of either funding, as you see in the graph there, where the budget for OCM activities at utilities is typically very low, mostly less than, over 50% is less than $100,000 a year. You'll also see that reality in the actual project implementations themselves, where OCM tasks are often assigned to a generic functional team member who has multiple tasks associated with them, whether they're doing configuration or testing or design work, and then they're also doing OCM work on the side. We also see sometimes that the business process effort is not necessarily to the level of detail that it should be, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. And then also, what happens sometimes is that the tasks sort of get pushed to the side until all of a sudden the specter of training arrives and everyone has this flurry of activity towards the end of the project where they try to actually put training in place. all those things reflect the reality, not necessarily on every project, but certainly it's relatively common within the market.
So from an organizational change framework perspective, we like to look at it in sort of component parts, because change management is not a one-time activity. It really spans the life cycle of your project and sort of dovetails into various work streams that are part of that project. On the upper left-hand side, we have business process management, and Chad's going to talk a bit more about business process management here during this presentation, but we really see business process management as a key component of organizational change, because defining your business processes, both understanding your current business processes and your future business process, it really will help you as a business define how you are going to operate, understand how you operate today, and define how you're going to operate in the future. And from an organizational change management perspective, we use a lot of the sort of outputs from the business process into the organizational change management piece. So certainly doing change impact tracking throughout your business process management, but prior to that, really understanding who your stakeholders are, doing a comprehensive stakeholder analysis and understanding where the various stakeholder groups are along the resistance and supporter spectrum, if you will. That's certainly one of the key activities that we advocate from an OCM perspective. Change readiness assessments, those are also critical to understand or gauge where your organization is. I make a distinction between change readiness assessments and operational readiness assessments, which you see at the bottom. Operational readiness assessment is more of a, are we operationally ready for go live? Change readiness assessments are assessing how ready your organization is to support and lead change. So I like to make a distinction between those. I would say communications planning and communications are a very key upfront activity. And then downstream in the implementation, you certainly have training and testing, which tend to happen kind of in conjunction with or concurrently with each other. So from a training perspective, ensuring you give people within your organization multiple opportunities to learn, whether it's via web-based training, instructor-led courses, some kind of one-on-one coaching, putting an online performance support system together, tracking learning through learning management system, and then a number of testing activities can be used almost as knowledge transfer activities and giving people exposure to the system, to the revised business processes, and giving them an opportunity to continue to explore and learn on their own.
And I think that testing is something that typically is not necessarily addressed as part of an OCM strategy. But I think it's a great way to get engagement from your end users and some buy-in and some sense that they own the solution as well. So, and I've seen that used several times on implementations, is to really broaden the testing that's being done in bringing additional folks in.
Right. So it's not, I guess, traditionally part of OCM, but understanding that there are organizational change components that can be part of or sort of utilized through your testing programs. So from a change acceptance perspective, we said that that's the ultimate goal, acceptance and adoption, understanding that people go through a process to get to acceptance, from awareness to understanding to self-concern to hands-on trial, and then again, hopefully acceptance. You see the what I refer to as a smiley face or a mustache underneath the middle three boxes in that diagram. It's to represent that it's not necessarily a linear process. People can go to hands-on trial or understanding and then go back to self-concern. So certainly need to help them and know where they are along the path. The middle bars or the middle bands represent the activities that are part of organizational change that help people along the change process, informing them, which is generally outbound communications, engaging them, involving them in activities, and then educating them, training them, giving them hands-on opportunities to learn, and then supporting them, ensuring that they have the proper support mechanisms, so if they have questions or concerns or if changes are made, that people within the organization are supported properly and aware of those changes. So this is a little bit funny. So Dilbert, most of us are familiar with Dilbert, so we'll add a little levity. Dilbert says, or I don't even know what those characters are, I apologize, I should know the names, but we're hiring a director of change management to help employees embrace strategic changes. Or we could come up with strategies that make sense that employees would embrace change. And I believe that's the HR director, so that sounds harder. More seriously, though, according to a 2011 study that Gartner published, organizational change management makes up about 17% of the success of an IT implementation. So change is hard, and that's really the point here, is that, you know, it sounds like, well, why don't we just do things that make sense, then everybody would just, of course, adopt the change. But change is hard because it involves people who, you know, have to basically unlearn things and relearn things, whether it's processes, systems, that type of thing. And it requires people to focus on the others within their organization to help ensure that they have what they need.
And what we found is it's key to success of the project.
So some trends that we're seeing in the industry regarding OCM is really very encouraging to me. I'm seeing a lot of organizations actually beef up, if you will, their OCM programs and OCM structure. We're seeing some utilities put formal OCM groups in place, whether it's part of HR, whether it's part of operations, whether it's part of IT. Some organizations are putting formal change management offices together. So if you've heard of program management offices, or PMO for project management and program management, change management offices are the sister organization, if you will, to the PMO, and really help manage change either for a specific project or across projects. So in this, we're also seeing organizations put together, you know, formalized methodologies, processes, and do some training for the employees within their organization, not just their OCM, basically OCM team members. They're actually training people throughout their organization, from employees all the way up to executives, so that they have the skills necessary to basically manage themselves through change and lead others through change. So this diagram, these two diagrams here are from an organization called Prosci. By way of introduction, Prosci is an organization that does a lot of research and studies around organizational change management, trends, practices, that type of thing. So if you think of PMI for project management, Prosci is that organization for the organizational change management side.
And what you see here is just a real positive correlation between a commitment to providing a very good OCM function within a project, and then being able to stay on time and on budget for the actual project itself. And obviously a real benefit. Everybody as a project manager wants their projects on time and on budget. I know I certainly do. And so, you know, while, you know, you can't necessarily prove a causation effect here, certainly the projects that have had great OCM or very effective OCM organizations have done well. And also from Prosci, the survey asked the question, you know, when do you start your OCM activities, and when do you when would you like to have started it, or when would you start it next time? And 40% said they typically started during project initiation, but in the, you know, post go live, they're saying, you know, 80% would say, you know, I would have preferred to have started it in project initiation. And really it's hard to start this process in the middle, because you're constantly playing catch up. You're trying to identify the people have already learned things as part of the implementation that necessarily will be harder to unlearn. And having that approach start at the very beginning with a dedicated team, I think is key to the project's success. I think that there's some definite benefits to starting early.
Yeah. So some of the trends we're seeing really is from starting organizational change activities early is really starting to build your case for change. So if a business case is put together for a project, really utilizing that and building your messaging around what your case for change is, so people start to understand why is it that we are doing this, and starting that early really helps.
And on these large implementations where you have literally dozens and dozens and dozens of stakeholders, getting your hands around those stakeholders and understanding how they're involved in the project and what their role is and how they're key to success of the project, understanding that so that you can work with them, so that you can communicate that and involve them is important as well.
So we've already talked a little bit about Prosci, which you see on the upper right-hand side. Prosci has a model that they refer to as ADKAR, which stands for Awareness, Desire, Knowledge, Ability, and Reinforcement. And so some of these early OCM activities really are geared towards the awareness aspect and the desire aspect, helping people understand what the change is and why, basically why that change is being initiated. On the left-hand side, John Cotter, he was a professor at Harvard Business School for a very long time, wrote a number of books on organizational change, change leadership, business transformation, and he has an 8-step model. And you can see that the first couple of steps are creating urgency, building the change team, creating a vision. Those are some of the early activities that you should incorporate into your organizational change management effort. Again, helping people understand why we're doing this. Building your change team. I recently heard a client say, or they certainly wanted to use the tagline, change is everybody's responsibility. And so infusing that type of culture within your organization, in some ways it comes from the top down. Certainly your leadership has to understand and embrace change and change management, but then infusing that throughout the culture of your organization is important. On the bottom right-hand side, you can see some outputs. These are typical outputs for us in terms of change programs that we work with clients to implement. There is no one-size-fits-all approach for organizational change. The program that you put in place for any project or for your organization as a whole needs to be aligned with your culture, your organizational structure, your business strategy. So, but here are some of the outputs in terms of the stakeholder analysis that we talked about, mapping your stakeholders, determining where they are, building your change network, doing your change readiness assessments, putting your communications plans together, tracking your change impacts, and then ultimately putting a training strategy together and a performance and a support plan in place. So this slide here, this organizational chart isn't necessarily representing a firm organizational chart, but in some ways represents the roles that need to be involved in managing and leading change, especially for an enterprise-wide system implementation. You need to have your company executives engaged and communicating key messages consistently throughout the organization. Those need to be mirrored by executive steering committee, as well as your project sponsors. From a project sponsor perspective, establishing a good sponsor model is very important and should be done at the outset of the project. We've seen a variety of models for project sponsors. I've seen single project sponsor models, dual project sponsor models, and in some cases, basically a trio of project sponsors. And there is no one right approach for project sponsors. I think the most important aspect is if you have more than one project sponsor, that those project sponsors be aligned well, that they communicate well, and they communicate consistently, and they make decisions well and resolve issues quickly and effectively. Project sponsors obviously have a great deal of influence over or with project management, OCM leadership, and the business stakeholders as well as the project team. So really, everybody's involved, and we have other slides, not so much in this presentation, but certainly other representations of change networks in terms of the actual roles that the people in these slots would perform. So this isn't essentially to get into the detail, but everybody has a role in change. Okay, so from a Prosci benchmarking perspective, this again was from the Prosci benchmarking study that came out last year. This shows a correlation between sponsor effectiveness and the project meeting its objectives. So you can see that if you have highly effective sponsors, a sponsorship model, that you are more likely to meet your project objectives, which is critical. So from a strategic alignment perspective, your organizational change program should really look at the three component parts: the strategic direction of your company, your day-to-day business operations, and your individual performance.
And what this really does is this ties together the business processes. If you go and you look, your executives are setting the strategic objectives for the implementation. Your project sponsors are doing that. Your individuals want to know the work that they're supposed to do on a day-to-day basis, and really the business processes that you define as part of the solution that you're implementing is what really ties all of that together, both within your organization and then also with your implementation. And that's why we see the business process definitions as so key to what you're doing on your implementation. If you notice that the objects that are on this slide really represent the four components that we talked about for OCM, which is the business process definitions. The change impact and communications represents the actual organizational change management, communications and readiness component. We've got the training curriculum and performance support, which represent the training component, and then finally the test scripts for the testing component. And what we've seen is business processes are fairly typical for system implementations and are done for a variety of reasons. They also help define the development process in terms of identifying code gaps in terms of reports, integrations, and customizations that might need to be done. But they also define who does what within the organization and are really important to really providing that roadmap for the actual implementation. So when we talk about business processes and the definition of them, from a simplistic standpoint, I think about them as data flow, manual tasks, and organizational responsibilities. How you're going to do something, who's responsible to do it, and then what the process is and what the handoffs are between the various organizations. And by everyone seeing that and looking at that and agreeing upon the rules of the road, that defines the roadmap for the implementation going forward, and it provides a way to go back and determine what the agreements were between various organizations, which hopefully, for the most part, will reduce the amount of conflict between the various stakeholders in the organization. When you do business process definition, there's the as-is, what the process is as it is today, and the to-be. And as-is, we did a study related to OCM, which we referred to last year, and the results were, I would say, fairly mixed. 19% as project implementations always define their as-is business processes. Sometimes they do it. 77% of the respondents said sometimes, and then so we got some non-respondents as well. The interesting thing I found on the to-be side was that apparently 6% of respondents never define to-be business processes as part of their implementation. I found that fairly surprising and used a word that I'm probably not supposed to use on this call. So I would just say it represents a significant risk to the project because there's so many things decided as part of defining those business processes that if you don't take the time to do it, it's going to lead to confusion and some misunderstandings, both from a systems and technology perspective as well as from an organizational perspective.
And if any of you were thinking that the word Chad was going to use was inappropriate, it wasn't. He was just going to use disastrous, and we agreed upon it, introduced risk, unnecessary risk to the project.
So, and what should the level of detail be for business processes? In our survey, we found that 83% post-go live felt like that their business processes should have been defined in more detail. I think that trying to come up with as detailed a business process as you can without going into every little exception that occurs within a business process is what you want to try to do. And then admittedly, there's a fine art to that. I mean, you could spend way too much time defining your business processes and not necessarily getting all the value for the time that you're spending. However, I think getting the stakeholders in a room and getting them to agree on what the process is and what the handoffs are and what the deliverables that are created and the work that is created as part of that business process is important. Because on these implementations, it's not necessarily the application itself that causes the problems. It's the integration with that application and other applications, as well as the work being handed off between various departments within a utility.
So to that point specifically, one of the goals of organizational change is really to align the people and the process and the technology. So we've talked for a fair amount of time on the business process aspect of it. And now we're going to transition and talk a little bit more about the individual people in terms of getting them sort of aligned and on board with what the change is, both the process and the technology change. So from a training perspective, so when you're addressing the true people, the individual performance aspect of it, that's most closely relied or attached to training. So what we've been seeing a lot is blended learning programs, and we certainly are a strong advocate. Learning is not a one-time event. You have to give people multiple opportunities to learn, so putting web-based training courses together, instructor-led that can be used as prerequisites, instructor-led training courses that really give people the hands-on time that they need and are very role-based. People, as Chad mentioned earlier, they don't want to just know how the system works. They want to know how to do their job using the system. So providing that role-based training and giving them hands-on practice opportunities to learn.
And I would say that in terms of those instructor-led courses, and even I think what Sheila's about to touch on next, online performance support, it really needs to be about the business processes. The training should be organized around the business processes. And apparently I'm stealing Sheila's thunder because she's laughing here. So Sheila, I'll shut up and let you keep going.
Stop. No, so from an online, there's certainly business process, very scenario-based. And then from a performance support perspective, ensuring that you have the ability to put policy, procedure, and reference information in the hands of the end users. Being able to assess knowledge and ability pre-go live and even then post-go live, and follow that up with refresher training and additional support opportunities. Maybe it's coaching opportunities. That certainly is important. And then we've seen some utilities using learning management systems. So these again kind of go to trends in terms of tracking class schedules and courses and all of that. And then the final aspect is reporting. So it kind of goes along with the assessments and performance support. But what types of metrics are you tracking, not only on performance, but on use of systems and tools and what the end users basically need at their fingertips. So being able to have reports that show sort of, what people's learning needs are and performance needs are is important as well.
Well, and one other thing I would add is, in terms of the training, if you think about training in terms of I'm going to train on the CIS application, I think what you often miss out on is that the solution involves a lot more than the CIS application. For example, one client that we had worked in a deregulated market, and a lot of the end user's job was not necessarily, it was doing one thing into the CIS system that was being implemented, but then there was work that had to be done within the actual distribution company's application. So that training was included in it as well, and it fed in a way that it was process-oriented, so you did certain things in the CI system, you did maybe one or two things into the distribution company system. And so just focusing on the application being implemented doesn't always allow the end user to do their job.
So this diagram just shows some of the components of a training program, understanding what your structure is from a training perspective, whether you have a centralized model, a decentralized model, or a hub and spoke model. Certainly if anybody has questions about that, we're happy to talk in more detail. don't want to spend too much time diving into that. From a tools and technologies perspective, ensuring you know where you're going with performance support systems, learning management systems, content authoring. Basically, how are you developing and deploying the content to the end users within your organization? And then from an engagement perspective, how are your training resources engaged in large projects, small projects, operational improvement, and refresher training? So ultimately, the goals of change management, so to come back to, truly what the objective is, and in terms of starting change management early, your goal really is to minimize reactive resistance, getting ahead of the game in terms of rumor mills and speculation about what the change is, why you're doing it, what change is going to be in effect. Certainly minimizing the passive resistance, or reactive resistance, being proactive in how you're managing resistance, and managing resistance on a continual basis, engaging the right resistance, or the most resistant group in the right ways. Certainly want to minimize performance decreases. So the diagram here shows what's typical as a productivity decrease after a new system or change is implemented. And certainly the goal around change management is to minimize the depth of the performance or the productivity decrease, as well as the duration of it, to help your organization, achieve a steady state operations and improve their efficiencies post-go live. Okay. So I guess back to the starting point, the importance of starting organizational change management efforts early. Obviously, there are some benefits here in terms of helping people understand, the vision, the objectives, the drivers behind the change, ensuring you have consistent messaging, and minimizing the rumor mills and things like that happen as people go through their emotional reactions to the change and make their way, hopefully, ultimately to acceptance. You can see that there are, some consequences of not doing change management effectively, either doing it on the OCM on the light side or not doing organizational change management at all. You'll have slower adoption rates. You may have some churn within your actual implementation project, because as people are, if you will, struggling through the implementation because they don't understand all of what's being changed, they will resist and potentially slow your project down. Ultimately, as we said, the goal is acceptance. I guess getting ahead of the curve in terms of, defining, what the change is, understanding what your risk is around whatever the change is that you're trying to implement, putting the appropriate budgets in place, putting the appropriate resources in place, establishing your change networks, certainly part of this overall program.
And ultimately, you want each person in your organization to understand what their role is within the solution that's being implemented, why they're doing what they're doing, and how what they do connects to the rest of the organization and provides value for the organization. I've seen several implementations where that was a good job was not done necessarily in getting everyone educated and on the same page. And the system could work fine, but if the users don't understand how to use the system to do their job, it's not going to be a successful implementation.
And so a little bit more levity to close us out. If you fear change, leave it here. I was actually in the New York City area last week having a discussion with a client and showed this. And they said, hey, Sheila, you could take that can with that sign down to the subway and probably make a lot of money, because people do fear change, so helping them through that process is important.
At the same time, it's tricky because not everybody will admit they fear change, but I do.
All right, John or Lisa, I guess, can we turn it back over to you? I think we're in the sort of the wrap-up phase, if there are any questions that people from the group would like to ask.
Yes, we're back on, and what a great presentation. I just want to let you know it's very informative. You all did a great job. I'm sure we had a lot of attendees online with us, and I would just go ahead and say thank you and on their behalf, on our behalf, for your presentation. It was very informative. We do have a few questions that have come in over that presentation, and I'd like to kind of address these to you guys. The first question would be, what type of OCM program and activities could be done post-go live if you feel your implementation did not address those needs?
Yeah, so we've seen a number of things. And Chad mentioned earlier kind of the scale, if you will, of organizational change management programs. And we've seen some clients do what we refer to as sort of OCM light and or training light. And they see the consequences post-go live. And there are a couple of things that can be done in terms of refresher training. We actually had one client contact us last year, and they had gone live, and they were a couple months into their stabilization period, and they realized that the training that their end users had received was not maybe as role-based or business process-based as they had wanted. So they put extensive refresher, they asked us to help them with refresher training and some post-go-live training in terms of some specialty training. So assessing the organization, assessing what the needs are, and understanding what the end users need. One of the other components of that was basically a performance support system, and ensuring that the end users have performance support in place, both from a people perspective and information that they can utilize. So, John, I think that's the answer.
And the performance support, we didn't delve into that a lot, but having something that is easily referenceable by the end users online, that's searchable, that allows them to address not only how the application works, but the policies in the organization in terms of how they address things. It really provides a level of confidence to the end users that they can do what they need to do.
Yeah.
Okay.
John?
Very good. Your next question, here's a great question that has come in. How much time does it typically take to define as is and to be business processes?
All right, well, that's a tricky question because I think the answer is it depends a little bit on the size of the organization, the number of services that utility provides. We've seen some of our clients start to document as-is business processes upwards of a year in advance of their system implementation or the start of their system implementation. It gives them an opportunity to really kind of open up the hood and make sure that their business processes, that they understand how their business operates today and they've defined those. It also gives their organization an opportunity to identify wish list items and pain point items. On the to-be business process side, generally it would take, I would say, probably 3 to 6 months just to define the business processes. And then they get down to, Chad mentioned, levels of detail. So once you define the to-be business processes, you also have to ensure that they're maintained throughout the life cycle of the project, because as business decisions are made or system functionality changes are made that affect business process, those have to get incorporated back in so that those decisions can be communicated out to the users and incorporated into training and testing and other downstream activities.
Yeah, the other thing that you need to be careful as you define your business processes is as you come up with that list, particularly for the to-be, that you don't simply take the functions that are in the application and use those as your business process. That, you know, create a customer in CC&B, for example, isn't necessarily a business process where you just go in and you define all the steps within CC&B that you would use to create a customer. It's more about the organization and what the organization does to create that customer, and then and more likely not only create the customer but actually do an enrollment.
Okay, very good. Looking at our hour, we are closing in on our top of the hour. I'm going to give you one more question, and so if you guys could answer this one. What specific OCM activities and deliverables should be done early in a project implementation?
So I'll go back to, I think, and not that we're going to actually flip back to the slide, but truly doing a stakeholder analysis, understanding who your stakeholders are, where they are along the resistance and supportive perspective. Putting a communications plan in place is very critical. Establishing your change network and defining your case for change. I would think those are some of the early critical activities.
Well, and if you think about it, I mean, the stakeholder identification process is needed just so that you can get them in the room to talk about the business processes, right? So, and as you define the business processes and identify, well, we don't know who does that, then you're actually modifying what your stakeholder identification list is, because you're like, you go find this person that does this one task that nobody knew about previously.
Yeah, and I guess as a final point, ensuring that the people within your organization that you are going to ask to manage and lead change have the capabilities and competencies and understanding of OCM and what their role is in OCM. I think establishing that foundation and that framework early is important.
Very good. All right. Well, I'd like to thank both Sheila and Chad for your time today. You guys did an outstanding job. It was very informative, and we really appreciate your time. And I know our attendees have appreciated your effort and your workmanship in this. And so as we top our hour, if your question was not answered, please email Lisa Collins with the CS Week office, and she'll forward that question to our presenters after the webinar for a follow-up, and we'll get you that information. At this time, we thank all our attendees, and we thank both Chad and Sheila for our webinar. This concludes the webinar for today.
Thank you, John.
Thanks, John.